Everyone out there in the live stream, welcome, welcome. It's super to have you here. Thanks for being part of this, either live or if you come back later and watching the recording. If you have questions or comments you'd like to be featured during the show, or for David or Phil, or even me, I guess, throw them in the live chat and I'll do what I can to bring them up. And yeah, Pradhan Havan, you no longer have to await. We are now here. I'd move. There we go. Perfect. Await stream. That's a good joke, man. All right, let's get going. David, Phil, welcome back, both of you, to Talk Python to Me.
Hello.
Hello. Thank you.
Yeah, it's great to have you back. David, I've had you on to talk about Flask, and Phil, I've had you on to talk about derivatives of Flask, I suppose, about Quart, your project. And, you know, they're both kind of approaching the same type of thing and then sort of zeroing in. So now we have you here together, I suppose, working on Flask 2.0, right?
Oh, yeah. It's all merging into one. Not really. Our efforts.
Yeah, but it's really cool to see you working closely together rather than just two disjoint things, right? I think that gives a lot of credibility, especially to Quart, right? Because Quart was kind of this experimental thing, and now it's, if not exactly, is it a Palettes project officially, or is it just working more closely?
It's working more closely, and in addition, it uses Werkzeug now, which it never used before. So it's been quite a lot of work in that project to make that possible.
Yeah, that's really cool. And Werkzeug is like one of these foundational bits of Flask, as we'll get into, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the idea is, because Quart was supposed to be API compatible with Flask, we want to get it using as much of what Flask is using as possible. And so, a long-term plan is to get it using even more Werkzeug.
Yeah, super cool. Maybe some It's Dangerous as well could get in there. Who knows? It's risky, but you guys can make it happen. All right, now before we jump into the main topic, Flask 2.0, you both have been on the show before. You know, often I ask people how they got in programming in Python and whatnot. You both answered that question previously, and people can go back and hear it if they want. So, how much to catch up? What have you been on? What have you been up to since you've been on the show last? Bill, you want to go first?
Sure. I think in open source sense, it's been working a lot on Quart and working more. At the time, I don't think I was really helping with the Palettes project, so I've been helping with them since. And just kind of developing those two and doing a lot of work trying to get the async support that's now coming to Flask, which is quite exciting.
Yeah, very exciting.
On a personal note, I work in London, so I've just been, I've actually worked for a few companies, tried my own startup. It didn't work, sadly, but working in London now, so that's good. Nice.
I love London. That's a fantastic town. I haven't been there in a year and a half, oddly. I don't know why. David, how about yourself? What have you been up to?
So I'm trying to remember when we did our podcast last, but it must have been like 3 years ago or something.
A while.
So yeah, after that, I've just been working down the backlog of all the issues on Flask and Palettes and all that. And now we're finally at the point where I'm confident about releasing all this stuff. So yeah, it's just been more open source work, and then still working for the same company I've been working for 10 years now. So that hasn't changed at all.
Yeah, that's cool. And I suspect they're pretty supportive of Flask.
Oh yeah, we get to use it internally. I actually introduced Python and Flask to the whole company way back in the day now.
Yeah, I mean, how much of an advantage is that to have somebody like you who's so familiar with everything, right?
Yeah.
If they didn't, they would be wasting
stuff. They definitely get to use that as like, hey, we've got one of the maintainers of the libraries we want to use.
Yeah, exactly.
What bring to the table?
What's the advantage you have? Well, have you met David? No, that's fantastic. That's fantastic. And check this out. You were back on episode 177, and the title was Flask Goes 1.0. So I feel like, this is September 15th, 2018. So it's been a while. But also, it's time to have you back because now you guys have incremented the big number in the version. Well, not quite, almost.
One more day.
Is it one more day?
Yeah, it's tomorrow.
Okay. So for people listening on your podcast player, that's like a week ago. But people on the live stream, one more day. Fantastic. Super cool. So I see some really interesting questions from people who are watching the live stream, but let's dive into a little bit of background stuff, and then I think we'll go from there. So I kind of wanted to start with the larger landscape of the web, and maybe also you could tell us about. I just threw that out there as if people would know the Palettes project. We talked about it a little bit with both of you. David, give us an overview of what the Palettes project is, because we have Flask and we have Quart, and then we have these other libraries as well. What's the relationships of all these things? I know Quart is its own thing, but it uses like Vexoid, for example.
Yeah. Well, Palettes is the organization, like just an open source organization, not an actual company or anything, that maintains Flask and the libraries that Flask uses. And so that's Flask, Verxoid, Jinja, Click, It's Dangerous, and Markup Safe. And it was started, all these libraries used to be maintained by the original author, Armin, and his other group, Poku. Mm-hmm. And eventually they kind of grew larger than that. And the original team kind of grew to do other things. And so he formed Palettes, and that's about when I joined and started maintaining everything. And so although recently I've come to the understanding that as much as I push the name Palettes, it will never have as much name recognition as Flask. And so you can also refer to things as Flask, and I will know what you're talking about.
Yeah, no doubt. Like General Flask obviously is made up of the foundational bits as well.
Yeah. And so Palettes for a very long time was just the GitHub organization that these projects repos were under. And I've been working over time to expand that into an actual open source organization, kind of not nowhere near this yet, but inspired by like how Django Software Foundation works and those sorts of things, where they do things besides just develop. So we've been working on, growing the community, getting more maintainers involved, running FlaskCon last July, I think, and another one is coming up, I think in November is this tentative schedule.
Nice. This is obviously, I would guess, online at this point.
Yeah, it'll be online still. It was online last time also, and it worked out pretty well. You can go find all the videos on PyVideo. They're up there.
Yeah. Fantastic. Do you have sprints or anything like that around it, or is it just presentations?
We didn't do sprints last time because it was just our first time running a conference, but we'll see what happens this year.
Yeah.
No concrete plans yet.
Yeah, fantastic. All right, I kind of wanted to start off this conversation with a wider view, just looking at the Python web space. So I put up here for us to look at the Python developer survey from the PSF and JetBrains for 2020. Obviously, it's 2021, but the results for that was the last survey that have come out. And over there, we've got the web frameworks being used, and these things are never comprehensive. Like there's 6% of other, or whatever that means. But we have Flask now clearly being the most popular one. So first of all, congratulations on that.
Yeah.
That's awesome. I wonder if Quart was folded into Flask, or if it went into the other, in a person's mind when they clicked the button, which did they click,
I imagine it's probably in the other, and a small percentage, very small. Nice.
Okay, well, so this is really neat. The big interesting thing here as well, beyond, I think it was you and Django, at least in this previous survey in 2019, were just tied, basically. So now you had talked about how there's a lot of growth and a lot of momentum. And I think it's even more than what you see here on the screen. Like, I think a lot of the APIs that Flask embraces in the way of doing web programming has been adopted by many of the other new frameworks as well. So, for example, we have Fast API making a jump up to 12% here, which is probably the biggest difference from the year before as well. So, go ahead. What do you think about this picture here? And then, what do you think about just the Python web space in 2021, both of you?
Yeah, I mean, Fast API is definitely gaining ground. Flask, I'm continually surprised that so many people use Flask. It's hard to wrap your head around like that many people. I was just looking at the downloads this morning, and it was 14 million in the last 30 days.
In the last 30 days. That's
yeah.
so insane.
And that's just Flask. Like if you look at like Jinja, because Jinja is used by things besides Flask, like Ansible, we're up in like the 20 somethings.
Yeah, very cool. And you can use Jinja just on its own for super interesting things as well. Like I recently did a project where I needed to generate a PDF that was like out of, here's data in a dictionary, and I need to make a PDF that looks formatted. And I just used Jinja and a Jinja template to generate the HTML, then feed it off to a PDF library that made it into PDF, right? There's all sorts of little edge cases like that.
And same with Click. I mean, people use Click to make actual command line applications, not just to provide a little CLI for Flask. So, when you look at this, like you realize that like, oh, they're also using like all these other libraries. But I never really like think about the numbers. I guess every now and then, I remember Flask having more stars than Django on GitHub, but that was because Django joined GitHub late. Yeah, and they've surpassed us now. But that's about the only joke metric I follow, really.
Yeah.
But yeah, I've seen a lot of interest in Fast API, and I think it's nice to just see that like nothing's stagnating. Like everything, like there's new ideas out there. People are like there's stable libraries that continue to develop like us, and we're still adding new features. And then there's like completely new ideas or new formulations of libraries.
Yeah, I feel like we're in a bit of a Cambrian sort of 1,000 flowers blooming type of time, and many of them won't survive that, but there's a lot of fresh ideas out there, and it's pretty exciting.
Yeah, like having a healthy ecosystem, having choice, that you can choose whether a certain framework is more appropriate for the project you're starting or working on. I think is really powerful for like users and you can borrow maintainers.
Yeah, and you can borrow ideas too. Like, oh, I see the way Fast API is doing types to like mean this. Maybe that makes sense to like allow that as an option somewhere else. Who knows, right?
Well, one thing I quite like to take from this list is Falcon has a really quite exciting router. And I think it might be a little too much for Werkzeug, perhaps. But I've been playing around with taking the ideas from Falcon and bringing it to Werkzeug. So what makes it exciting is it's a very fast matching system, and it should outperform the Werkzeug router if we can get it in by a good fraction. So that'd be exciting.
Yeah, there's a lot of interplay here that I think is pretty neat. And while we're on this sort of broad topic, Rohit asks out in the live stream, what are the advantages of using Flask over Django? Or maybe that pairs them up a little bit too tight. But looking at this list, these are the ones that probably the trade-offs people are thinking about.
Yeah, this gets harder for me to answer over time because I haven't used Django in a long time. But it's hard to compare them one-to-one. It's like apples and oranges, right? Like I said a couple minutes ago, like you're choosing the project that's most appropriate, or the framework that's more appropriate for your project and the way you want to work. So it's not necessarily that you're going to be losing out or getting any given feature by choosing one or the other. It's about how they feel when you're working on them. Like sometimes Django makes more sense to people, or Fast API makes more sense, or and then like they also have different goals, right? Like Flask is deliberately just the web framework and wrapping some other libraries around it. But its goal is that if you want other features, somebody develops an extension that is specific to that, and you add that on. And I mean, Django and I don't know about Fast API yet, but like Django has the same idea. It's just how many batteries they decide to include is different.
Yeah. Phil, you want to take a shot at this before I give my thoughts as well, maybe?
Yeah, I think specifically Flask and Django, I always thought it came down to a kind of a choice about how to do things. Like Flask doesn't really give you an answer, and you can go and choose from the extensions, whereas Django does. And I think it's like David said, a bit of what your preference is, really, what you prefer.
Yeah.
I mean, Django is making huge strides in like async also, and we're adapting to that too. But they all have different solutions to the same thing. And approaching from different directions.
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of interesting stuff happening in Django around this as well. So the way I see it is, Flask, it's like an empty canvas, and it's got just a few really nice little building blocks, and then you can build what you want, right? Do you want to use Postgres and SQL Alchemy? Great, that's totally easy. You want to use MongoDB and Mongo Engine? equally easy. Go have fun, right? Like you can pick just the little bits that you really like. You don't have any other bits to worry about, and then you're good to go, right? Django, it's like, well, if you want to break from the Django RM, probably you can do it, but there's a little bit of a mismatch there. You kind of got to work around it. Its advantages kind of become less good, right? Like its admin tools might not work as well if you try to say switch to Mongo or something along those lines. And if what you want is like, I'm not really sure what I'm doing to build this website, and I just want some guidance, like just show me the main way and I'll just do that. I just would like to go along for the flow. I think Django is fantastic for that. It gives you like really good pre-built tools like the admin stuff and whatnot. But if you really care very much about which little piece you pick and you want to put them together just so, I feel like you're better off with a micro framework of some sort like Flask. Anyway, that's my view. And I know some people love one side and hate the other and vice versa. So it's also a personal challenge or a personal thing you got to work out for. Where do you fit on that spectrum?
Yeah. I mean, I personally started with Django. Flask was just being started when I was starting to learn Python and web frameworks. And then I eventually ran into something where I wanted to do things that Django wasn't designed to do, obviously.
Yeah.
And I started running into a bunch of stuff, and so I switched to Flask.
Yeah, that's cool. And, if you come from an ecosystem where there's like clearly one choice for a lot of things, if you come from Ruby, okay, you got Rails and the Ruby ORM. Come from Microsoft, you got ASP.NET in a framework. Like you don't have decisions, you just do the thing, and then eventually you build your app, right? You come to Python, there's like 20 different choices at each level, and you're like, this is like the paradox of choice. This, even though it's in some ways it's great, in other ways you're like, I have no idea what to do. And so I think that can be a challenge for people as well.
Yeah,
but also an advantage once you get into it.
Yeah, I think your best bet, if you're asking the question, should I use Django or Flask, is to just pick one and learn enough, about that framework. And I think you will be better equipped to answer that question for your project next time you have to ask it.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Doesn't really matter what you start with.
All right, before we get into more specifics, so sort of a general Flask question as well. Pradvan says, since Flask started as an April Fool's joke, does the core team, David and crew, have any traditions around April Fools? I hadn't thought about that. It's a good question.
Every time somebody brings up that it was made on April Fools, I remember that it was made on April Fools. I always forget that.
So I'm guessing not too many ones. Okay.
We don't have like a birthday party or anything or celebration. Maybe we should.
Maybe you should.
The community team.
There you go.
I think you put out a blog for last year, 10 years, didn't you? That was quite a good celebration, but I think that was about it.
Maybe yeah. It's been 10 years for a lot of the libraries at this point.
Yeah, very cool. So let's talk Flask 2.0. It's been a couple years. It went to 1.0. It was on the zero ver train like so many projects were before then, right? And but that doesn't really mean that it was such a huge transition. But there's a lot of stuff changing, not necessarily in a breaking way, but a lot of new things in Flask 2. Give us the exciting news.
Well, the biggest one is probably async. I'll let Phil talk about that.
Yeah, there's like a async for Flask directly, and then like maybe tighter integration with Quart type of next level async, right?
Yeah, exactly. So with Flask 2, you'll be able to write async view handlers or route handlers, depending on what you like to call them, before and after request handlers and teardown functions. So it won't require any special effort other than installing Flask with the extra support. But then you can just write async and await and carry on with your current setup. You don't have to change anything else.
Yeah, that's super neat. And you actually gave a talk, was it May 1st or something, 10 days ago? What was it called? It was, why isn't Flask async? And yes. Obviously that's like leading into where things are going. You want to tell people a little bit about some of the ideas there? You talked about the history, obviously Flask being a WSGI or WSGI application. Those are all naturally having a hard time moving to async because, right, the server itself needs to know. But then you also talked about some of the things that are happening to allow some async to run directly without any server changes, and then so moving to an ASGI server. Yeah. So what's the story?
Yeah, exactly. So obviously Flask started as a Whiskey framework. I think it was probably Whiskey from the start, right? So
Yeah.
I know. So I couldn't quite remember when Whiskey was introduced. So yeah, and obviously before Async
We
Await,
have all these
was
different
introduced.
servers, and I don't want to have just this framework run on that server. So Whiskey is born, right?
Mhm.
But born in a
And,
world where async was less common.
Yes, but what it has supported the whole time, and I think what's good to point out is Flask has been async the entire time, just using greenlets, and a lot of people use that very effectively. I think it's absolutely fine, and that for us, I think was one of the key things to bear in mind, that Flask works async, and if we introduce async await, we can't be breaking that at the same time. So that was one of the big constraints, really. And then, so for the one side, it's keeping support with those existing async solutions, and the other is introducing the async await keywords, which I think everyone has heard of, the color problem and the virality associated with that, which makes it actually really hard to get a little bit deep into the call stack, if you will, async, without really having to change the whole call stack to async in one swoop.
Yeah, the challenge, maybe I'll try to give a little bit of background just for people listening, is if I've got some low-level data access library or service access library for like using HTTPX or something, in order to await the thing at the bottom, that has to be an async method. The next level up, in order to call that method, it's got to be async. You got to await it, so its method's got to be async, and it goes up the entire call stack in a lot of cases, right?
Yeah. So what it came down to, and what we did was follow Django, what Django have already done, really. And what they've figured out is that you can run the asyncio event loop in one thread, and the greenlet-based one, or whatever you were doing previously, in the main thread, and then everything coexists nicely. You just need these wrappers to move things from one thread to another. And that library, if you're interested, is called ASCII-ref. But using that allows us to have this async code in the view handler, but keep Flask synchronous in the rest, and keep support with Greenlet, which is really nice.
Yeah, that's really nice. And in production, in a lot of the servers, it has threaded modes already, that if like you're awaiting something and then something talks to a network, like a database call or a web service call or something, it's going to release the GIL anyway, and the other threads can run. So that can probably push out pretty far just on its own, right?
Yeah. I think it's been very effective to a lot of companies. I know companies that use it. I think it's been really nice. So that's what we've got to. And I think you were talking about, where can we go? Can we go fully async and ASCII with Flask? And this is possibly more of my personal opinion, but I'm not sure it is possible to go there with Flask, because I think if you do so, you end up breaking extension support, because it's quite common for extensions to extend the Flask class and change the methods, but of course they won't be async. So how are they going to deal with that? So
yeah, there's the compatibility problem, and then there's also just the problem of having to mark everything as async and await if you mark one thing. We might discover, I'm a little more optimistic than Phil, but I'm also not as experienced with it. But I would like it to be possible, like at some point, for us to, we're focusing on like making a Werkzeug sans IO, so it doesn't require blocking IO operations when you make requests and stuff, so that you can use it in ASGI situations. And that's going to be a slow process. We're not like 100% done with it or anything like that. But my hope is that as we make Werkzeug completely like IO agnostic, we might discover some ways to adapt Flask.
Yeah.
But it's also not 100% necessary, because Quark exists also.
That's an interesting point. Maybe there's a way to implement some of those extension. So the problem is the extensions override certain functions that are part of the life cycle of requests, and those are expected to be synchronous functions because they had been for all of time. You can't just make those async and have those extensions still work. At best, they're going to be kicking out unstarted coroutines. Maybe it's probably worse than that, but maybe that's what they do. I don't know. Something is not going to go super well, but maybe you can create synchronous wrappers around the async stuff that can, grab an event loop and run it or something. I don't know. Like there could be some sort of an adaptation thing where just the sync version maybe is not quite as fast or something. I'm not sure. Yeah.
Well,
as much as you guys have, I have way less than that.
Well, I was going to say, I think with Flask 2, I think this is, in my opinion, where you want to be, because the motivation in my mind is you want to use some async-based library, and there's some exciting ones out there, so I can fully understand that. And you can now in Flask, and it will work, and it will work with your existing setups. I think the only reason you could want to go fully async is because you're only using async libraries, perhaps, or perhaps you might see a bit of performance improvement there, which isn't necessarily guaranteed, by the way. For that, though, I think there's Quart. So I kind of think all the users' motivations might be covered now, which I think is really exciting.
That is very exciting.
Yeah, and our goal is just to get Quart and Flask as API compatible as possible, and they're already very, very close. But moving very quick in that, and so ideally, it should just be a drop-in name replace for everything to keep working.
Yeah, and you could probably pull it off with just the right import statement, right? Import Quart as Flask or something potentially almost.
I don't know how Phil feels about it.
No, well, there's some monkey patching in Quart where you can tell everything else that Quart is Flask, so you can use some of Flask extensions with Quart by allowing Quart to pretend it is Flask. This is kind of fun.
yeah, that is quite wild.
I did see a question, will Flask break current extensions? No. Our goal was still compatibility and stability. So we are making major releases and we are adding new features, but it shouldn't permanently break anything. There might be some unforeseen incompatibility that a library needs to update for, but it's not like they will suddenly have to rewrite their whole thing async or something.
It's not, if it breaks it's not on purpose.
Right.
That
makes it sound bad too, but
no. I mean, your intention is to have it be compatible, right?
Yeah. That's always the intention of these libraries. They're meant to be very stable, and it's actually one of the things I've been working on as a maintainer, as I've been maintaining these over the years. Is when I do make releases or when I make changes, I try to make everything show a deprecation warning first, and then only remove it in the version after that. So I do want to evolve things and refactor things, or identify patterns that weren't great or that aren't needed anymore since we're dropping Python 2.
Yeah,
and I do want to evolve the libraries, but I don't want to break anybody without warning them first. And so there's a ton of deprecation warnings in all the libraries this time.
That's cool. So speaking of that, I saw this really nice Flask 2.0 is coming. Please help us test by Stetio. I don't know who this is. If you know, maybe you give him a shout out.
Oh, that's me. Yeah.
Oh, is that you? Okay.
Reddit username.
Perfect. All right. Yeah. So from you, Phil. And he said from the changelog, one of the things coming. Well, first of all, one of the things coming is Python 3.6 plus only, dropping 2 for sure, and even 3.5. That's pretty interesting.
Well, 3.5 is end of life now.
It seems so new in my mind, but it's clearly not that new anymore.
When I first made the announcement of dropping Python 2, 3.5 wasn't going to go end of life until 9 months later, but I decided I was going to drop 3.5 anyway. We won't usually do that. Usually our plan is to try to wait for the actual official end of lives for Pythons from now on. But 3.5 it was so much more convenient to drop it at the same time. And 3.6 is still supported, but the next versions after these will be 3.7 only, because 3.6 will have gone end of life probably by the time we make new releases. Right.
Okay, very cool. And how much the 5 versus 6, was it just that 3.5 is going out, or versus F strings?
We do use F strings all over the place now, but that wasn't the reason. I mean, since we were doing 3.6 plus, I decided to use F strings in a lot of places. I don't remember what was inconvenient about 3.5, but I
think async was slightly
different. This was a year and a
different.
half ago now when I made this decision,
sure.
So.
Yeah. I mean, look, if you're switching to 2, it's a chance for a nice break from some of these things, even if they've got a few months left.
Yeah. I was originally 2.0 was just going to be like dropping Python 2 and making maybe a few minor changes. And then I got anxiety about making releases and breaking everybody's stuff. And so I just kept working on more and more stuff into 2.0 instead of releasing it. But because it's 2.0, that also kind of gave me the opportunity to like identify more stuff that I wanted to deprecate than normal, maybe, or
but it's the perfect
bigger
time to do
features
it
to
with
add.
such a big version change. Version number change. All right, I want to pull out a few more things from now that I know it's Phil's Reddit post here, which got 1,300 upvotes. That's pretty awesome. Short format decorators. So instead of for routes or routes for you in London, instead of app.route, specifying get or post, you can just do app.get, app.post. That seems easy but nice.
Yeah, it's just a bit of syntactic sugar, really. It should make it a little nicer. It's something going back to the ecosystem. It's something the other frameworks all seem to adopt, and it's nice to steal.
Yeah, that's one of the big differences I've been seeing from the other frameworks, that they're very much like Flask, but they kind of put the verbs on the decorators a little bit more. So why not take it back if you inspired them in the first place? Also, blueprints, man, blueprints are something I think do not get enough attention and love, because they are so nice for organizing your code into little bits and little categories of functionality, instead of trying to associate them all with the main app, the app. So there's some news around that for updates as well, right?
Yeah. So you'll be
one of the oldest standing open issues. Phil decided to just like, I can solve this, and he like wrote something over a weekend, I think, or it felt like that.
Way to go, Phil. Now it's blueprints all the way down.
I'll let Phil describe it.
It's exactly like you can nest blueprints in blueprints. So I think the kind of for code structure is really helpful, because now it doesn't have to be all in that one blueprint, right? You can split it over a few files and bring them in, which helps a lot. And there's other structures where maybe you want to reuse some part of something in another blueprint, so you just bring in parts. But yeah, you can just use that to. And you can use the command register blueprint on a blueprint to register the blueprint and carry on.
Yeah, you used to have to say app.register blueprint, and you would give it the blueprint, and that would help you build up the various pieces. But now you can nest them, and they can be more hierarchical, which is great.
Right. Before it was just one layer. You had the Flask app and then the blueprints. And so like each blueprint could have a prefix, but people haven't actually asked for it for a while, but it's still been an open issue, and it doesn't seem unreasonable. People have wanted to like have prefixes for prefixes, and so then you get nested blueprints, and now it's possible.
Yeah, awesome. Let me take a couple of the questions out of the live stream. Sure. First, Doug Farrell out there. Hey, Doug. Says, hey, I'm working on a book that uses Python Flask as a primary example application. When might Flask 2.0 be released, and should I plan on updating the book to use it? I'm guessing Doug didn't catch the very first opening bit, because you said tomorrow.
Tomorrow. If you're interested in following Palettes news in general, there's @Palettes team on Twitter, and there's also palletsprojects.com/blog, which has an RSS feed. And so we actually have announced this already. But yeah, it's May 11th tomorrow. Fantastic.
And then John Sheehan says, you're right, we don't hear enough about blueprints. I love blueprints. Yes, absolutely. Radovan says, in our Talk Python training web training course, which is a Flask, it says Flask, basically we rebuild pypi.org with Flask. So is it uses safe to use Flask 2.0? I think so. Like David said, there shouldn't be any breaking changes, maybe deprecations. If you see them, let me know. I can update that. But I think it should be fine, right? Same reason that production apps work, the like example app should work.
This time, this is the first time we've tried to do release candidates before we've made releases. And so we actually have had release candidates up for about a month now for all the libraries, where you could test your existing code with the new versions. But I think in the future, when we do this, we need to do a better job at advertising that. So it's something we'll get better at over time. But
yeah, cool. Well, people listening now know. Then also, I think interestingly related to both the micro framework side of the story, but also the new features, like especially the async stuff. Rohit asks, which will be the most compatible databases supporting framework for Flask Zero? On one hand, like just do whatever you want, right? But on the other, you've got Flask SQL Alchemy as an extension. You've got the ability to use like Tortoise ORM because of the async support. Like there are new options, right? What do you think?
I mean, Flask makes no requirement. It doesn't affect what database you use. Flask SQL Alchemy, that will have a 3.0 release similar to these soonish. I think I'm going to take a little break after this release first, but it should continue to work.
What's the SQL Alchemy 1.4 just released with the first async API, and they're moving towards 2.0 as well with a new API. What's the story around their new API and the SQL Alchemy async support with Flask SQL Alchemy? Is there anything overlap in there?
So Flask SQL Alchemy is compatible with 1.4 right now. I did make a little bug fix release recently for that. 2.0 is just deprecating things. So, and nothing that Flask SQL Alchemy uses is going away. So it'll work with SQL Alchemy 2.0 when that happens. In terms of the async stuff, Flask SQL Alchemy, like the extension, might have to do something if we want to enable using that pattern, but we might also not, because it's using a pretty clever use of greenlets to enable compatibility between sync and async code. And Flask's async support should support that out of the box, or not out of the box, but it's possible to extend it to do that.
Yeah, it's super cool. All right, another thing I saw in the release notes was that around Werkzeug, there's performance improvements coming in Flask and Werkzeug. Do you want to just give people a little insight into what's coming there?
Yeah. So one of the things, I think the one that got the most attention, got some interest on the Python subreddit, was an improvement we did to the form parsing. So I think there's this issue that's about 5 years old, saying it was a bit slow, especially for large files. And as David mentioned earlier, we were looking at moving that to be Sans.io. And in the work to do that, the original author of that issue actually came back and said, if you do this, you'll make it a lot quicker as well. And when we did that, he pointed out we made it about 10 to 15 times quicker than the previous form parser. So,
wow,
so
that's awesome.
if you're being sent files to your Flask server, it should be a lot quicker.
Yeah, form data in general is faster. And then if you're uploading large files, that's way, way faster than what it used to be. And
like multi-part form upload type of files.
Yeah, so if you were uploading even like hundreds of megabytes, it could be really slow in some cases. And so now you can just upload however big, gigabytes of ISOs if you want. And should work fine.
Just like
it'll still take as long as it takes to upload, but
yeah, you can't change the internet. Yeah, it doesn't make it worse. I see.
Yeah,
cool.
And I don't know. I think I'm trying to think if there were any other performance improvements in Werkzeug. I know a couple releases ago we made a pretty big one where to our URL building, which made it like 10 times faster or something. But that's already released. But it has been getting faster.
Yeah. Okay.
So we haven't measured it, but I think the work, taking out all the compatibility shims and just going pure Python 3 should be noticeable.
Yeah, since we've removed all the compatibility code for Python 2 stuff, like literally the compat.py files are gone, and all the code that was calling that. There's still some more work to be done on that in terms of like accepting both bytes and strings in a lot of places where it doesn't really make sense anymore. Mm-hmm. So there's still some overhead, but there's a lot less compatibility overhead than there was before. But yeah, it hasn't been measured. But I expect that to be noticeable, because when Werkzeug and Flask first added support for Python 3, going the other direction, so it was Python 2 only, and then it became Python 3. Some people stuck with like really old versions of Werkzeug and Flask because there was a noticeable performance degradation by adding all that compatibility code. So now that it's gone, should be better.
Okay, yeah, fantastic. I know the NumPy people, they actually got a lot better They shrunk their code a bunch by dropping 2.0 or Python 2.7,
Mhm.
and similar for you all.
Yeah, it's just, I mean, besides the performance improvements, it's just more maintainable now. I pushed really hard to drop Python 2, or even before it went end of life. I started thinking about how to do it because I never used Python 2 back then, and I still don't know. And so every time I had to fix something, I had to like, oh gosh, now I got to run the Python 2 version of the tests and figure out how to like make some weird compatibility shim, between the two. So it was a nightmare maintenance for like maintainers and contributors.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's probably easier for contributors as well now to come in because they don't have to. A lot of people these days they don't know Python 2, right? And
Right,
they
exactly.
don't want to come in and like learn, something from 10 years ago just so they can keep it compatible. They just want to add the new feature.
Yeah, and it's not like if you somehow have like a Python 3.5 application still or whatever, you can stick with Flask 1.1. You'll still get your application working just fine. I mean, we're not going to be supporting it because we just don't have that capacity, but the libraries are fairly stable. Like we almost never get bug reports asking us to backport something, for example.
Yeah, and I use Dependabot like pretty much anybody who uses GitHub does, at least for security.
Right.
And
I think
don't
people
see
have become a lot more aware overall of that they should be pinning dependencies and how to do that and how to upgrade intentionally. And so hopefully over time that, less people will be surprised by updates and their applications will continue working with the versions they work with.
Right, exactly. And if you're worried about these changes, just pin it to 1.11 or whatever it is and just let it be until you're really ready. But also you'll get notified of any security issues that you might need to jump in and fix, right? So, and what I was going to say is I don't remember seeing any around Flask and Vexoid almost ever. So they're pretty stable, it seems.
It's pretty rare for there to be like critical bugs or security related bugs reported. We get stuff every now and then, but we just make a point release.
Yeah. And Rohit asked previously about like, why would I use something like Flask over say something like Django? I notice security releases for Django more often. And I think it's because they just have so much more going on. Like they have a whole admin section with forms and input, and you guys just, if it's not there, it can't have a vulnerability.
There's a much larger attack surface. Yeah.
Yes,
exactly. I think that it's not that Django is less secure overall, though. I mean, first of all,
no, I don't mean to
security updates, so they're staying secure. But I think they have a much larger team, and so they have the capacity to do these sorts of analysis that maybe we don't. I'm not saying like I think Flask is insecure, but it could be that they've just got more eyeballs on these things, like noticing like, oh yeah, we shouldn't do this. We can make it safer or something.
Yeah,
like that.
Yeah, and I just think the surface area is so much larger.
Yeah,
that it's bound to happen.
Maybe
Doug has
in that position for Flask too.
Doug says, "Oh man, trying to get in Django, my new job. So much magic, too much magic happening there for me." But he also has a question that I think maybe Phil, you spoke about in your presentation.
Yeah.
Like, does this release change how you run in production? Like Unicorn versus MicroWhiskey versus who knows what, Hypercorn?
Yeah, I think the good thing to say is that no, it doesn't change it at all. It still works the same, and you can still use Unicorn and use the async capabilities now in Flask. If you wish to use an ASCII server, you can as well. You need some middleware and adapter to do it, and there's some examples in the Flask docs if you want to see which one we recommend. So you can choose any server, but yeah, very important for me to point out that you don't have to change anything. You can just carry on as before.
Yeah. So if you want, how would you categorize? You actually in your talk spoke about a spectrum of async capabilities. On one hand, you have Flask with its decent async support, but not full AGSI server capabilities. And then you've got Court, which can be 100% ASGI. And so you kind of thought of it as a spectrum, right?
Yeah, so my idea is that if your code base is mostly sync, as it may have started, then Flask is a great choice. If you want to add a bit of async here and there, it's still a great choice. It's only when perhaps you want to go fully async, or you've mostly async with maybe a few sync pieces of code, that you actually would choose Quart. But I think the really nice thing for the user is you can hopefully just go across that spectrum, eventually change the name, but then just continue, and is a pleasant experience, is my hope.
Yeah. Awesome.
You should still be able to use the same WSGI servers, basically. Like we've said a couple of times, like we're not breaking anything. We're not changing how Flask works or anything like that. So you still deploy it the same way. And if you do want to use an ASGI framework for some or server for some reason, you can always use an adapter to serve a WSGI app over ASGI too. You just don't get any of the benefits, really.
Yeah. And Doug makes a good point out there that Flask and Flash for the Win still making Gunicorn a good solution. With Gunicorn, you can change the worker type, right? You can let it be the regular one, or you can say, I think it's -K for the option. You change the worker type to UVicorn workers, which would switch it to be an ASGI version. So you don't even necessarily have to change anything but like part of your command line for your startup of your Gunicorn, and that could be the total change you have to do.
And going back to a point that Phil made earlier, that's in the same way you could change the worker to use like Gevent or something, and already have an async Flask, just with an older version of async code or an older implementation.
Yeah. And Joe out there says, I had to look at the new async IO features, but it seems from the docs that it's early days and maybe later versions will get more async IO adoption. So I guess that's a good direction to have a quick chat about. So this is 2.0. Is this where you see it sort of land, or do you see this as a progression?
Oh, I think it's fair to say it's a progression, definitely. I mean, the ideal outcome in the end would be to somehow merge Flask and Quart. Users be able to use any amount of async or be ASCII or WSGI, and everything just works nicely for them, really. Again, as I said earlier, I'm a bit skeptical about whether that could be the one namespace I just called Flask, or whether you need to split it up as it is now. But yeah, I think it's the start. Hopefully we can keep going.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like the async stuff we've got in there so far is for supporting the most important thing that we thought people were needing async for, which is I have some async code, or like I'm using discord.py, for example, to write a Discord bot or something. That's all async, right? So if you want to write that code, you need to type async def and put your code in there.
Right.
And so we're enabling that. We've got extension points to change, what async IO loop you're using, like async IO versus Trio versus Greenback.
Or UV loop or something, maybe.
Or I'm not sure if that would tie in. Phil might be able to answer that, but and then addressing things like being able to do WebSockets and that sort of thing. We might be able to do that in Flask eventually, or that might be the place where you switch over to the Quart namespace. But you're using the same API, it's just a different name.
Yeah, Phil, that's something I wanted to ask you about. Just to let you give a quick shout out about is the WebSocket support that you all have in Quart.
Oh yeah, I mean, I don't know if there's much more to say other than it's definitely supported.
Just
go ahead and use it.
Well, you did bring some of that stuff back to Werkzeug though. So because you're using Werkzeug in Quart, you needed to be able to route to WebSocket URLs as opposed to HTTP URLs, and so we now have a way to identify in our Werkzeug router whether something is intended to be a WebSocket or not. So it'll change based on the scheme that you're using.
And I think it's good to point out that Miguel has a kind of experimental support, I think, in Flask as well for WebSockets, which
nice.
It's good to keep an eye on. We'll have to see how that goes.
Yeah, there is. I don't remember what it was called or anything, but there's like a way that Gunicorn will let you take control of the HTTP socket from an endpoint, and so within your Flask view, you could take over controlling the socket and start treating it like a WebSocket instead.
Like an upgrade type thing.
Yeah. So you still are in Flask in WSGI mode, so you're still sync in terms of one worker is blocked handling that one thing, but it's pretty clever.
Yeah. And Joe out there throws out that it's Miguel Grimberg. I'm guessing
also-
it's the Miguel you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah,
Shout out to
There's
Miguel.
also Flask Socket IO, but this is like a more native thing where you can just do this directly in Flask instead of needing an extension. So
Yeah. Okay.
some cool stuff.
Yeah. Super cool. All right. We're getting sort of short on time, so I want to ask a couple of questions and hit on some high notes as well here. So one of the things that I think is pretty exciting that GitHub has done, GitHub I think continues to be pretty neat. And one of the things they've done is they've added sponsor support for projects, right? Has that been helpful to you all?
Yeah, we've gotten quite a lot of support. We're part of the PSF, and so we take donations through them. If you go to palletsprojects.com/donate, you get the PSF donation page. So we've got lots of people, making one-time donations or scheduled, monthly donations. Then we're also part of TideLift, which is a commercial sort of open source support service that we're getting funding through. And we were also, this isn't really a sponsor link, but since we host all our docs on Read the Docs, we're partnered with Ethical Ads, which is their advertising platform, to share the advertising revenue on all our docs. And so we're getting quite a bit of funding.
Yeah, that's fantastic. That's good to hear. I do feel that like there's probably a handful of billion-dollar companies that are using Flask at the core that maybe could click that link and do a little more. But shout out to them. But
if you're using Flask at your company, take a look at the sponsor links.
Yeah,
we have lots of plans for what to do with it.
Yeah, I was really happy to see GitHub put this in here because like just having like a little, buy me a coffee link on the side of a homepage that didn't seem like it worked. But I think this sort of central way. And what's interesting is I didn't realize that you could link to external sponsors. Like my thought was that sponsor button really was going through the GitHub sponsor channel or framework or whatever.
Yeah, we haven't. I've heard people recommend that we use GitHub sponsors as well because a lot of companies who are already in GitHub's ecosystem have an easier time clicking that button than something external.
Yeah.
So that's something
like
I will be
or
looking into
versus not apps, like versus go to our site to buy it type of integration, right? I feel like it's almost like that. Yeah, I would definitely recommend it. I've sponsored some things through the sponsor button there, and it's super easy. Okay. Mars, how about that?
Yeah, Flask is on Mars, or helped
awesome.
The lander get to Mars.
And I bet if I pull this up, let me see if I can find your user profile here. If I just have to hack the URL, it's going to have to be that way. And I go down here. Here you go. You have the official achievement, Mars 2020 helicopter contributor. How awesome is that? Phil, do you have one of these as well?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
I'm so jealous. I want one of these.
Everybody who's gotten a code contribution to the repositories should have that badge. And there's been plenty more people who have contributed in other ways that should have that badge, but don't.
Yeah. You should also have the Arctic Vault contributor badge.
Oh, I have the Arctic one, but I turned it off a while ago because I thought it was kind of silly.
Yeah. This one is way more.
I don't know how that whole system works, but if they had archived Flask 2.0 after all my work was like done, I'd be much happier. But they archived it like 2 years ago now.
Yeah. So there's a lot of ways in which Python is being used on Mars. When the lander first landed there, and people said, "Oh, look, there's the F Prime library that was used to power the Ingenuity helicopter. That means Python's there." I'm like, it looks like maybe Python just trained the model and C++ was there, but it turned out in the lander that went down, actually the cameras, all the different angles were controlled by Python. Mm-hmm. And then getting those images back to JPL was part of Python. And yeah, what's the story of the Flask and Mars? This is so cool.
Yeah, so Flask is actually part of F Prime. So F Prime is like their I'm not an expert on this, but it's like their flight control software, I
Yeah.
think. So
Yeah,
it's like a monitoring dashboard for everything. So they're using Flask to provide like all this information about the launches and flights and landings and get updates in real time. So I think that's where our stuff came in, but I'm sure other parts of their code are using Jinja or Click in other ways, not necessarily through Flask.
Yeah. Oh, that's so cool. What did y'all think?
It's very exciting. Every now and then I'll see like a, some big thing like this F prime, and they won't have mentioned Flask or anything, but I'll have like this intuition that it was used, and so like I went and just looked at F prime, and I'm like, oh, it's Python requirements.txt Flask, and then I went and announced it on GitHub. I'm like, wow, check this out.
Yeah, that's super cool.
It's
So
exciting.
neat. Yeah. Go to the dependency graph. I'm sure we'll see. Yeah, look, what number one dependency right there.
There we are.
In Flask RESTful. Yeah, something to do with APIs here, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Cool. All right. Let's, I guess, round this out with two things, actually. Real quick, though. I want to take a question, I think, or follow-up comment from Ikivu. Might be off topic, they say, but they would love to know more about how to convince a large employer to spend money sponsoring an open source project.
I wish I had a good answer for this. I know there's been thought on this. I'm just not the best person to talk about it. I'm not an expert yet. I would say look at Tidelift. They're a company, and their whole like job is to be that in between open source who doesn't know how to convince companies to do this, and companies who are using a lot of open source but don't know how to analyze their dependencies and divide up their support. And so if you go look at Tidelift, their whole goal is to enable that sort of thing and discuss it with management and all that. Tidelift.
It may be
Tidelift. If they're getting they might be down temporarily. Never seen that before.
Maybe. I think maybe ACP versus HTTPS. Yeah, we're good.
Connection.
Yeah, so that place. Yeah, I do think this is a good option as well. They sponsored Talk Python for a little while, and I think they're definitely trying to be creative in this, right? They're trying to offer something to employers that's not just put it on your charity column in the balance sheet. They're like, we don't have a charity column in the balance sheet. What are you talking about, right? So doing something a little bit different there. And then, go ahead,
sorry.
Phil. No, go ahead.
I was going to say, you can look at it, I think, as a company as part of your recruiting spend. I think every company knows how competitive the market is. And I do think engineers do look at what interest and what you do in the open source community and look at it in a positive light. So I think that might help.
Yeah, I totally agree. A couple other quick follow-up questions. Olga asks, can F prime connect to APIs on Earth? Like, do you guys know anything about this?
I think it is used on Earth as well. I mean, like I said, it's like a monitoring dashboard, so it's not something that's actively running on the rover, I think, from what I understand. I think it is accepting data from sources like the rover and other systems and then displaying that and coordinating it.
Very, very cool. And then Joe asks if Armin Ronaker's still involved with the project, any?
Armin is not. He's still part of the GitHub organization, and he's like in our maintainer channel on Discord, but he's moved on to other things. He's working in Rust a lot and other things.
My impression is he's kind of moved on to Rust and is just enjoying his time there, which is totally fine. Like, people don't have to stick with one technology their whole life, right? Even if they made contributions.
That's one of the things I've been trying to do too since I became a maintainer was get more maintainers, right? So it's not just Armin, after Armin, it's not just me. I'm trying to expand it so it doesn't matter if Armin or I are still involved. Yeah.
And Box of Ninjas out there says, I need the Mars endpoint.
Yeah, I don't think they just let that out to anybody.
Yeah, there's probably they don't put auth in there. It's hard to find the endpoint. No, I have no idea.
Connect to the right satellite at the right time.
Exactly. You can just tunnel over there. All right. So I think that's probably all the stuff we got time for. But thank you guys for covering this. Let me ask you the last two questions before you get out of here. If you're going to work on Flask or Quart, what editor do you use these days?
I've been using PyCharm for almost a decade now, I feel like. Pretty much since when I started using Python. So PyCharm all the way.
Right on. Phil?
I use Emacs, although I've used VS Code a few times. If I ever record something, I use VS Code. But yeah, Emacs is where I do the work.
Oh, yeah. Do it right down the bare metal. Awesome.
Yeah.
Cool. And then recommend some library package you all have come across recently that you're like, oh, this is super cool. People should know about X. Any ideas?
Well, I'm really enjoying using Pydantic to validate the incoming requests, like just as a data class setup. I know you can do it with different ones as well, but the syntax seems so clean just to say looks exactly like a data class, and I just use it to validate my incoming. It's great.
That's fantastic. Yeah, one of the things I've started to do is like the first line in my Flask API endpoints is to say Pydantic model equals class **, what is it, request dot JSON, something like that. Like just immediately try to convert it to and validate it with Pydantic. Something I learned recently, I had Samuel on the show who creates and maintains Pydantic, is, although I didn't learn about it on the show, someone else pointed out to me, is there's a secrets capability built right into Pydantic that like works with like .env files and all sorts of stuff. It's got this whole mechanism. So yeah, that library does a bunch of cool stuff.
So
David?
I don't have a good answer for this because I've been just dealing with Flask itself for so long and getting those ready that I haven't really been exploring new stuff for myself.
Does this mean I get another?
You can have another, but yeah, so like hopefully I get to learn about some new libraries soon after Flask 2.0 goes stable. I will say at work, this isn't official yet because we need to write documentation. It's totally unusable right now because it's not documented, but we've been working on a open source library called AutoInvent, which takes a data model, like such as your SQL Alchemy models, and produces an entire GraphQL API and React front end from just the data model, plus like customizations to some metadata.
Oh, that's cool.
It's super handy. It's really cool. It's completely undocumented. So I will, at some point, maybe half a year from now, announce the actual project. But if you go to an autoinvent.dev, you can see all our messy code right now.
Oh, nice. Oh, you got one more. Go for it.
Oh, yeah. So Trio, if you've not heard of it, is a different async await based event loop implementation. And I think I really like it because the structured concurrency it introduces is the way I think the most Pythonic way to do async and await.
Yeah, Trio is neat. I had I don't remember the maintainer's name, but I had him on the show. Nathaniel, that's right.
Yeah.
I had Nathaniel on the show, and yeah, it's super cool. Like how you can have dependencies between this task created those tasks, and you cancel one, you cancel them all. There's a lot of interesting patterns that come out of there. Very neat. All right, I think that's it. David, Phil, thank you. Quick shout out or a quick final call to action. People want to get into Flask 2.0. They want to upgrade their stuff. Maybe they want to take advantage of the async stuff or whatever. What do you tell them? Where do they go from here?
Well, look for that new version releasing tomorrow or a week ago, depending on when you listen to this. Follow Pallet's team on Twitter if you want to see announcements for new things. And also, if you're interested in like contributing to these projects, I would encourage more people to go on GitHub. At least star the projects you're using, but also watch them. Watch for new issues coming in. There's anybody can pick up one of these things and help out. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, I think Star and Fork are the ones that get all the attention. But yeah. One thing that GitHub just recently, I know I said this is it, but I just want to give a little quick awareness to people. I think it's super cool. If you forked a repo, it used to be you'd have to go to CLI and add an upstream origin, and then you have to kind of keep that in sync. Now they've added a button that if you go to a fork and it's yours, you can just click a button and go sync my fork with the original now. And I think that'll, encourage people to fork it and just stay up to date. It's a little bit easier. So that's pretty cool as well. Phil, final call to action. What do you say to folks?
Well, I think it would be go out and use it and let us know if it solves your needs, if it does what you want. Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. Thank you both for being here. And
Thanks, Michael.
Yep.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye. Thanks everyone on the live stream as well. Thanks for being here.